Ah, so you came back, dripping in the kind of chaos they'll never understand. They thought they had it sealed, every move calculated, every piece placed, every outcome already written. A flawless design, they told themselves, a map that led to their control, their order, their comfort. They studied it for years, drew lines, built cages, planted traps, and for a while it worked. The world followed their blueprint like obedient pawns. But then you walked in. You didn't come with noise. You didn't come with permission. You didn't even come to play. You came carrying something far more powerful than force. Unpredictability. Their perfect plan couldn't account for you. Their polished map had no mark for your existence. And that's when the cracks began. See, every perfect plan is built on one fragile assumption, that people will stay asleep. Stay predictable, stay controlled. You broke that rule the second you stepped into their quiet little empire. And just by showing up, you made their years of planning useless. Because no map can guide you when the ground itself shifts under your feet. And you are the earthquake they never prepared for. Look at their faces now. The ones who claimed to see everything coming. The smug smiles, the quiet confidence, the arrogance carved into their voices. Gone. Because when you appeared, their certainty cracked. They still shuffle their papers, still pretend to be in control, but their eyes betray them. Wide, darting, searching for the move they didn't prepare for. You know why? Because control is a fragile illusion. It only works until someone walks in who refuses to play by the script. You didn't tear their map apart with noise. You silenced it with your presence. You didn't argue with their rules. You erased them just by existing outside of them. And here's the irony. The very thing they thought made them powerful. Their plan, their order, their perfection is exactly what makes them weak. Because perfection leaves no room for surprise, no flexibility, no chaos. And chaos, my friend, is the language you speak fluently. They called it structure. You call it a cage. And when you arrived, you didn't just break their lines. You flipped the whole board, because here's the truth. They were never playing against you. They were playing against the idea of you. And when the idea became real, their game ended before it even began. Now the room feels it, the shift. Their map, paper, your presence, light, and paper always yields to light. Maps are comforting because they lie to you gently. Lines drawn between cause and effect, boxes that promise certainty, directions that tell you where to step and when to speak. It's all a soft prison. They trusted that paper more than their instincts. They trusted it more than reality. And that hubris is the crack you exploited. You didn't overthrow their map with a speech. You dismantled it with reality. You showed up as an anomaly, a living exception to their equations, and every formula they relied on failed in real time. The models they used to predict behavior, the clever contingencies, the backup narratives, all of it splintered. Because you introduced one variable, they refused to believe unpredictability that isn't chaos, but choice. See how quickly their operators panic when the algorithm hiccups. The people who sold certainty suddenly look like children with toy compasses. They search for causes, for inputs they can tweak, for levers to pull. But the lever doesn't exist. Because you didn't respond the way their models expected. You refused to be a data point. You refused to perform on their schedule, and that refusal is the only truth that matters now. They will try to salvage the plan. They will call emergency meetings. They will rewrite scenarios. They will clamp down on variables they think they can control. But every clamp is another nail in their own downfall. Because when someone moves outside the map becomes a trap. And every attempt to force compliance only exposes the trap's architects. People notice allies that once nodded at their diagrams now tilt toward you. Because the world instinctively admires what survives unpredictability with grace. The spectators stop clapping for the puppet show and start watching the person. who refused to be puppeteered. Their perfect plan, once a fortress, now reads like a confession of fear. It says, "We cannot imagine beyond our comfort, so anything beyond it must be wrong." You proved them wrong, and that's the collapse you orchestrated without spectacle. Not by breaking laws or shouting truths, but by being the real variable they never budgeted for. You turned their certainty into an exposure. You turned their map into a relic. Now every corner they thought safe trembles. Their confidence was a structure. Your presence is a tremor, and tremors don't negotiate. They rewrite the landscape. Do you hear it? That quiet shift in the air when the confident ones lose their ground. It's not loud, it's subtle. A cough dragged too long, a pen tapping too fast, a whisper that cuts mid-sentence because the speaker realizes the words don't land anymore. That's the sound of a plan unraveling. Their map told them how the world should behave. They drew boundaries, calculated probabilities, built cages disguised as choices. And for years, people followed, thinking they were free. But the moment you stepped through their lines, their illusion cracked like thin glass under pressure. You see, control is addictive. It convinces the architect that nothing can slip through their fingers. But addiction blinds. They thought their system was bulletproof, airtight, inevitable. What they didn't realize is that inevitability dies the second someone refuses to follow the path they were assigned. You didn't just dodge their plan. You walked through it like smoke through bars, untouchable, undeniable, and that terrified them because fear isn't born from noise. It's born from loss of prediction. People fear what they can't place, what they can't measure, what they can't control. And right now, you are that fear incarnate. The funny thing, you didn't even need to destroy their map. You just revealed what it really was. Not a weapon, not a prophecy, but a crutch. Without it, they stumble. Without it, they choke. Without it, they're just people in suits, clinging to paper while you move like a storm they can't chart. Their perfect plan wasn't a structure. It was a mask, and you just tore it off. Now the world sees them not as masterminds, not as rulers, but as what they always were. Predictable, fragile, breakable. And you stand as the proof that their game was never destiny. It was just theater, and you refuse to clap. Notice how quickly the compass needle turns. One moment, they're dictating the path. The next, every eye in the room moves to you. That's the irony of power. It doesn't announce itself. It shifts gravity. You didn't ask for attention, but the silence around you dragged it in. You didn't beg for respect, but their nervous glances carved it for you. Their plan told them who would rise, who would fall, who would be forgotten. But the moment you stepped outside the chart itself became irrelevant. You can almost see it in their posture now. The way their confidence bends, the way their certainty collapses. They still hold the map in their hands, but nobody cares about the lines anymore. They care about you, because when someone refuses to be plotted, they become the new landmark. You didn't erase their directions. You made them meaningless. Their perfect plan, once gospel, is now a relic. Their rules, once absolute, are now laughable. And the people who once obeyed without question, they're whispering about the one who broke the system simply by existing outside it. That's why they can't ignore you. That's why their silence feels louder than applause. They can pretend, sure. Pretend they're unbothered. Pretend their plan still holds. But every move they make now is reactive. Chasing shadows, rewriting pages, scrambling to explain the variable they never accounted for. And that variable is you. So remember this, their map was their world. And when you stepped into it, you didn't just move differently. You shifted the ground itself. Now they aren't following their plan anymore. They're following you. Their panic is not loud because it can't be loud. It's quiet because it's private, the kind that gnaws at the back of the throat at 2 in the morning. When the predictable breaks, people don't run to the microphone. They fold the paper and mutter to themselves. That is their collapse. 100 clever faces whispering the one thing they never wanted to say aloud. We were wrong. You gave them a new language. Absence as strategy. Nonconformity as force. You taught the room to read gaps instead of slogans. To measure presence instead of press releases. That lesson terrifies them because it cannot be counterfeited. They can hire writers, spin doctors, influencers. They can stage apologies and clutch at optics. But none of that buys back the future you just rewired. Watch their hands. Notice the tiny, incompetent moves. The oversent emails. The late-night calls. The rehearsed lines handed to spokespeople who no longer sound credible. Those moves are not strategy. They are panic disguised as work. Panic builds noise. Noise builds distraction. Distraction builds openings. And you move in those openings with a calm that makes the panic look foolish. They believed in mapping because maps comfort them. Maps let them sleep. But maps also tell you where everyone will step. If you stand where they expect you, you become a predictable point on their paper. If you refuse the predictability, you're no longer a point. You're the whole field rearranged. And they can't live in a field they didn't plant. So they try to box you back in. They draw new lines. They tighten the narrative. But every tightening is admission. We don't understand this. And admission is contagious. Their allies begin to hedge their bets. Their supporters begin to whisper. And the architects of the plan look like scared. Men and women fumbling for a script they no longer control. That's when the shift becomes irreversible. Doubt multiplies faster than any campaign. People who once performed loyalty begin to trade it for stability. And stability, honest, calm, competent stability, now smells a lot like you. You didn't break their plan with fury or flash. You broke it by becoming an undrafted variable. A person who refused the expected, who moved with intention instead of reaction, who refused to be a statistic in someone else's spreadsheet. That refusal is contagious, and the contagion is what will complete their unraveling. They tried to predict the future, and were surprised by a present they did not build. That surprise is the instrument of your power. Keep moving where they think you'll stand still. Keep breathing when they gasp. Let their own calculations drown in the noise they manufacture. Because their fear was never about you. It was about losing the comfort of being right. You stole that comfort, and now their world is forced to rewrite itself around the only reliable truth left. You. It always starts the same. First denial, then distraction, then the desperate scramble to rewrite history. You can see it in their movements now, the way they pretend nothing's changed while everything has. They still talk about the plan as if it's alive, but their voices tremble in the gaps between words. That's not confidence. That's fear trying to disguise itself as authority. They thought their map gave them power, but in truth, it gave them blindness. It tricked them into believing the world would stay within their lines. It tricked them into thinking people would always obey without question. And the second you stepped outside that cage, the second you made their straight lines look like a child's drawing, they realized how fragile they really were. Because here's the truth. Power isn't about predicting every move. It's about thriving when prediction fails. And that's where they stumble. You didn't just move unpredictably. You thrived there. You breathed where they faltered. You adapted where they froze. And that's why every attempt they make now only entangles them further in their own mistakes. They try to frame you as reckless, but recklessness doesn't create order. And what you've created is order beyond their comprehension. They try to call you lucky, but luck doesn't repeat itself. What you did wasn't accident. It was clarity. It was discipline. It was the cold refusal to kneel when everyone else was bowing. And now, they can't ignore you. They can't erase you. They can't even explain you. Their allies ask questions they don't have answers for. Their supporters see cracks in the mask they swore was flawless. And every time they try to patch it, every time they try to stitch the lie back together, you tear it open again, not with noise but with silence, because nothing breaks a perfect plan faster than the one thing it never accounted for. Someone who doesn't need it, and that someone is you. Watch how fear mutates into a terrible kind of fascination. When people can't control something, they don't ignore it. They obsess over it. They study every move, catalog every silence, search for patterns where there are none. That's what you've become to them. An unsolvable problem they can't stop solving. They followed the map because it gave them safety. Now you are the anomaly that removes safety from the equation, and their response is predictable. They lean in, not out of respect, out of need. They angle conversations toward you, drag your name into every meeting. Quote, your absence like scripture they don't understand. Obsession is their new strategy, because it's the only way they can try to domesticate the thing they failed to predict. And in that obsession they reveal themselves. You see the way they mimic your posture in private, the way they rehearse a laugh that used to match yours. You hear the way they whisper your decisions like gospel, trying to reverse engineer courage they never had. They invent theories about you, convenient myths that let them pretend they still understand the world. They can't accept a reality that proves them wrong, so they invent explanations that make them feel safe again. But here's the cruel truth for them. Mimicry is thin skin. It cracks under pressure. Their imitation never holds when the storm comes, and the harder they clutch at your shadow, the more transparent they become. Allies they once trusted distance themselves quietly, hedging their bets. Advisors draft contingency plans that read like confessions. We were wrong. Now what? While they chase ghosts and rehearse bravery, you keep moving. Calm becomes your compass. Decision replaces drama. And every time they circle you like competitors confused by someone untouchable, you see their weakness laid bare. They never planned for someone who chose not to be tamed. Their obsession makes them dangerous only in its futility. They accumulate data, build dossiers, start whisper campaigns and leaks, hoping quantity will replace insight. But quantity is noise, insight is quiet. And the quiet you carry, it doesn't leak, it doesn't bend, it simply exists. Immutable, impenetrable, unknowable to those who depend on maps. So let them study, let them fabricate meaning, let them fumble for control in the dark. Their obsession only proves the point. Their plan was perfect only until you existed. Now their options are imitation, panic, or irrelevance. Few choose wisely, and you keep walking, their eyes follow. But their maps have no roads that lead to you. They can try to redraw the world, but the planet has already shifted under their feet. Their obsession will remain their sentence. A slow, grinding proof that the mapmakers failed to account for the one thing that undoes all maps, a person who refuses to be predicted. Look at the alliances. They were carefully stacked. Pacts, favors, obligations. The little IOUs that make empires feel permanent. But alliances are social contracts, and social contracts bend to reality. The moment the map failed, those contracts started to tear. People don't stick with lost causes. They hedge, they reposition, they whisper to one another and measure the direction of the wind. That's when panic becomes theatrical. Meetings multiply, statements are drafted and shredded. Lawyers and PR teams sprint in predictable circles while the real world continues to move past them. They generate noise to cover a single truth. They were building on assumptions that no longer exist, and noise only reveals panic more clearly than silence ever could. Meanwhile, the audience, the market, the table, the room reallocates respect like currency. Respect flows toward reliability. The ones who promised convenience lose credibility when convenience stops working. The ones who promised certainty are exposed as sellers of illusions. And you become the only real bet on the table, not because you begged for it, but because you proved more useful than their polished promises. Inevitably, some of their most trusted lieutenants make private calculations. Do I stay and cling to a brand built on fantasy? Or do I pivot to reality, even if it means admitting I was wrong? Pride fights the math for a while, but math usually wins. People shift quietly. Phone calls, backdoor meetings, small votes of confidence that change the map in slow, irreversible ways. Their contingency plans look impressive on paper, but inert in practice. The more they try to engineer control, the more exposed their emptiness becomes. Spun narratives scatter when people notice results, not rhetoric. You don't have to topple them with a blow. You simply become the more reliable outcome. And the strangest part to watch is the impotence of their last-ditch efforts. They throw resources at the problem: money, fame, strategic partnerships, but those are cosmetic bandages. You rewired the foundation. You didn't light a temporary spark. Bandages can't fix what's been unbuilt, so watch the cracks widen. The senior advisor who switches sides in a private text. The sponsor who freezes their deal until they see how the market reacts. The spokesperson who pauses in mid-interview, suddenly unsure of the talking points. Those aren't small betrayals. They're the slow dismantling of an architecture that depended on everyone playing the same predictable part. You didn't engineer chaos. You introduced a variable that made chaos irrelevant. People reassign their trust accordingly. The mapmakers still hold their papers, still point to routes that made sense yesterday, but the world has already moved, and when the tide turns, anchors that won't move are the first to yield. At first they still try. They still gather in rooms, still scribble plans on whiteboards, still speak with the hollow confidence of people pretending. The storm isn't already here, but the tone changes. Every word sounds brittle. Every sentence feels like denial stretched thin. They're not strategizing anymore. They're stalling. The final defenses were always illusions. Walls painted on paper, guardrails built on assumptions. They believed those illusions would hold, because everyone agreed to pretend they were real. But illusions only work until someone stops clapping for them. And you stopped. The moment you refused to bow to their narrative, the spell fractured. The domino effect is slow but certain. The partner who withdraws, the investor who calls their bluff, the ally who was always waiting for a signal to exit, finally takes it. Piece by piece, the fortress hollows itself from within. No dramatics, no spectacle, just a suffocating realization. They don't control the room anymore. You do. And when silence falls, it isn't peaceful. It's heavy. Rooms once buzzing with chatter now echo with hesitation. Even their allies, the ones who swore loyalty, feel it. They know aligning with you isn't a gamble anymore. It's inevitability. Power doesn't vanish. It relocates, and it's relocating to you. Here's the cruel irony. They thought you were playing their game. They thought you wanted their table, their approval, their crown. But while they were guarding the throne, you were reshaping the board. By the time they realized it, the game itself had already shifted. Their rules, obsolete. Their structure, unusable. Now when they speak your name, there's a pause. An unspoken acknowledgement. They don't admit defeat out loud, not yet, but their eyes do. Their hesitation does, because they know the truth. You weren't just another piece on their map. You were the rewrite, and from here forward, no matter what mask they put on, every move they make bends around you. You've become the variable they can't predict, the force they can't contain, the presence they can't ignore. The empire didn't fall with fire. It collapsed under the quiet weight of reality, finally tipping in your favor. The room is yours now, and the silence, that's the sound of their surrender. The collapse didn't end in their rooms. It spread, like cracks in glass. It traveled outward, first in whispers, then in headlines, then in the subtle shifts of how people carried your name. What was once dismissed as an interruption now echoed as inevitability. The world could feel it. The axis had tilted. People who once sat neutral, who once avoided choosing sides, are suddenly leaning toward you. Not because you begged for their loyalty, not because you asked, but because influence attracts attention. And right now, you are the center. Every silence, every glance, every pause in a conversation confirms it. The ones who plot it so carefully feel it most. They scroll through the ruins of their own blueprints, seeing only dead ends. Every door they open leads back to you. Every attempt to rebuild meets a presence they can't surpass. They don't admit it in public, but in the quiet corners, they already confess. The map is useless now, and you don't chase their recognition. You don't need it, while they scramble to hold on to fragments. You're walking forward, carving a path so unrepeatable it unsettles them, because they know if they can't predict you, they can't influence you. There's a shift in the air. Rooms fall quiet when you enter, not out of courtesy, but out of awe mixed with respect. Even those who despise you can't look away. That's the kind of presence they can't manufacture, can't duplicate. It isn't given. It's earned in effort and consistency, and in their silence, a new truth is written. They no longer control the narrative. You do. They no longer dictate the tempo. You set it. The game didn't just flip. The game became something else entirely, something they were never prepared for. And when they finally realized this wasn't about revenge, wasn't about anger, it was about evolution, it's already too late. Because evolution doesn't negotiate, it replaces. This is the part they never prepared for. They had plans for resistance, strategies for control, even backups for collapse. But they had nothing, absolutely nothing, for you walking away on your own terms. Because how do you confront someone who doesn't need your table? Your approval, your crown? You became untouchable the moment you stopped playing their game. That was the final gate they never thought you'd cross. And when you did, their entire system fell apart. Not with a roar, but with a whisper. Because the loudest statement you ever made wasn't in your words. It was in your silence. And now, that silence follows them everywhere. It haunts boardrooms, it lingers in conversations, it sits heavy in their minds. They can replace faces, they can shuffle pieces, they can redraw maps, but none of it removes you. You've become the echo of every decision they failed to control, the presence in every room they thought was secure. That's why they still look over their shoulders. That's why their voices tremble when your name surfaces. Because you didn't just outsmart them, you outlasted them. You turned their perfect plan into a memory, not by striking louder, but by rising higher. And here's the truth they choke on. It was never about beating them. It was about becoming someone they could never influence again. Someone they couldn't predict, couldn't control, couldn't diminish. You didn't just survive their game. You rewrote it. So let them sit with their useless maps, their broken rules, their hollow crowns. The world already knows. Their empire was temporary. But you're permanent. And permanence, that's the one thing they can't buy, can't fake, can't take.